countdown required.
Did you get?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that, everyone. We've had, obviously, we've had some technical difficulties, but yay, we are here. Yes, finally, we have got ourselves here. So we're going to do this very, very quickly. I'd like to welcome, as you can probably see to my left, we've got a bit of a change of team tonight. We have Russell joining us tonight from the team, and it's lovely to have Russell back in Aotearoa because, as you know, he has been away for a wee while. So it's nice to have him and his wise words joining us this evening. And then between Russell and I is the rose between the two thorns. It's Ben Leggett from Elemental, and he's going to be sharing with us tonight his Roots Gin. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that have already commented that they're very excited about this one. Yes, Cordula, we know you were getting thirsty. I'm so sorry about that. And yes, before we start, happy birthday, Jenny. It's Jenny's birthday today, everyone. Wish her a happy birthday. If I had more time, Jenny, I'd sing to you, but you're lucky we don't have enough time for that now because we've had the technical issues. So what do you need for this evening? I am doing Fraser's usual job. So Fraser is not that well at the moment, so that's why we don't have him joining us. So we're all going to miss him tonight, but we're gonna crack on and try without him. So you'll want your tasting notes, and of course on the back you have space for your own tasting notes, and you will need this little beauty. Your bottle of gin, and we're all ready and cracking for that. Of course, you know the QR code's on the back for you. So once you've had a sip of this one, I'm sure you'll be quickly trying to scan the QR code so then you can get some gin. The other thing you'll need is probably a mixer. Mixer of your choice. Of course, in the box this month we had we've got the elderflower tonic, and we've also got the Mediterranean, both from Fever Tree this month. So either of those. I personally went Mediterranean with the Roots, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Ben as well as to what he likes to mix with Roots. But of course, usually we're the straight up style to get us started. And so you may not even want to progress with a mixer. Who knows? I mean, I know for myself, it was no mixer required for this one. So without further ado, I am going to pass us over to Ben. Ben, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It is fabulous to have you, and so excited to have this gin in the box. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it, Russell? We've been trying to get this gin in the box for a wee while, and we're very excited to have you here tonight, Ben. So thanks so much, and I'm going to pass over to you so then you can take us through a tasting of this beautiful gin.
Okay. Righto. Well, pleasure to be here, team. I wasn't sure what sort of frame you've got there, so there's a really lovely shot of a plastic jerry can, which I wish wasn't in there, but it's a last-minute swap to my laptop, so we've definitely got more, but I wanted to sort of give a little bit of an impression of obviously our unique little setup here. So I'm literally sitting just in between the walls of two 40-foot shipping containers that we have actually built our distillery out of. They're all upcycled, they're all repurposed from dead stock that we've recladded, and we've turned one of those 40-foot containers back into a 20-foot space. And this is literally what you're looking at now, which is where we keep our distilling apparatus. So it's a nice little sort of backdrop there that's quite authentic. But as for tasting, thank you for joining us, and for obviously being interested in listening to me talk about our gin. So Roots Marlborough Dry Gin is the combination of, very much a dream of mine. I've been in the spirits industry for almost my entire career. I'm a Marlborough lad, born and raised, but spent 14 years working in spirits in the UK and Europe. And classic story of also coming back to my roots to try to sort of have my cake and eat it too. So the combination is Roots Marlborough Dry Gin that you've got in front of you. And Slasher, cheers. You'd have to excuse me for drinking my neat. I'm that kind of a guy. But this is basically a gin which is also with its namesake is all about the botanicals. And when it comes down to gin, that's arguably sort of like the only major story that we all have to talk about. But sort of taking a step further, ours is not only about being very transparent about what botanicals go into our gin, but very, very transparent about where we get them from, what we do with them, who grows them, how do they grow them, and how we process them before we even get anywhere near distilling. So for us, that botanical traceability, that botanical transparency is everything about Roots. And so first and foremost, though, we proudly, created a gin which is all about juniper first. And these days, I'm sure you can understand, gin is this crazy category that kind of encompasses, pretty much almost anything you like. Even from a legal standpoint, you could literally take a bottle of vodka and you could put juniper berries in it overnight and legally sell it as gin the next day on a shelf. So it's a category that is very much unregulated, very much with a grey kind of guideline as to what gin should or shouldn't be. But the one sort of thing we have to sort of direct us is its namesake. And gin, as I'm sure you all know, is an old English sort of bastardization on the Dutch word for gin, for juniper rather. And so if juniper is anything that expresses, that's where we start with our recipes. So played around with as many different single origin, fresh examples of juniper we could possibly get our hands on. And ultimately we've settled on very much the most expensive one. So we deal with a wild forest North Macedonian juniper that we import ourselves direct from an amazing father and son business based in East Sussex in England. And they literally go to North Macedonia 5 times a year to work with local farmers in this sort of highland area to hand forage our juniper literally with a stick and a barrow. And we have incredible photos on our website and at our distillery that literally shows Michael and his dad, Tommy, and they're just there beating bushes. We've even got an incredible video that shows them doing it, last year. We even get harvest reports from how individual vintages actually change and how much the juniper berries have or haven't developed that year based on weather conditions in a very similar way to vines. So for us, that kind of degree of ridiculous geek is the sort of thing that gets us obviously pretty excited. But if that's going to be the majority of our gin expression and it's going to be the thing that's going to be gin first and foremost, that's the one that we sort of, have been very proudly paying the most attention to. So wild North Macedonian juniper, 6 botanicals in total make up Roots. That one is the vast majority. It actually makes up about 72 to 74% of our total recipe by volume. Then we have, for us, we're very proudly sort of a London dry gin in style. There's a lot of arguments about how you define London dry gin, but legally it's juniper forward first of all. And then you've got this sort of classic gin sort of category, which is now more and more becoming more recognized. And a classic gin would be something that you might, pick up a bottle of Gordon's, Beefeater, Tanqueray, and when you drink it, you are getting something that is definitively a gin. So that kind of classic expression of flavor profile is basically the combination of juniper forward with angelica and coriander seed, which is what we distillers call the Holy Trinity. So most classic gins have those 3 botanicals in majority, and that gives you that traditional classic sort of style that we all kind of hopefully discovered gin on. So for us, we have coriander seed. All of our botanicals come from New Zealand seasonally, with the exception of the juniper, which of course we have to import. So everything else we get at a single point in the year to get it as fresh as possible. So we have coriander seed from Hawke's Bay, which we get from the amazing White family farm, who's also the biggest growers of hemp in New Zealand. We then have a beautiful citrus fruit. So we get ours as grapefruit. We get that from the Kemp family in Gisborne. And they literally next Saturday are going to deliver 600 kilograms of from grapefruit from a single orchard in their estate that they literally pick within 36 hours and send to us as fresh as possible. And we hold an event here at the distillery called the Great Annual Grapefruit Appeal. And we hand peel that grapefruit as fresh as possible with a group of 30 local volunteers, some live music, low and slow barbecue brisket, pork belly, and a live band. We obviously have an incredible afternoon with local support to sort of, capture our grapefruit at peak freshness. So these are kind of examples.
Does it have to be local, Ben?
What's that, sorry?
Does it have to be local?
No, not at all, but it fills up in about 4 hours from the point of posting. So I actually think I've got someone from driving up from Christchurch this year, which I'm quite excited about, because you also get the same people coming back each year, which isn't bad, but it's not much for exposure. But we do have a lot of fun, and there's a lot of good, content and videos and things on social media.
I think there could be a few members keen on that next year, right?
Yeah, indeed, and it is a great event. We also so those are our sort of primary 3 botanicals: the juniper, the coriander seed, and the grapefruit. And then we also have hops, which we get from Motueka, an organic species that comes straight over the hill from Nelson. And we get that as a pure cone, and we have that to give this sort of like grassy, slightly sort of citric edge to the gin as well. Then we have 2 more botanicals. One of them is kawakawa berries, which is very different from the leaf, which you see in a lot of other gins. Kawakawa is a natural native pepper, but the fruit itself, or the berries, only grow about 2 to 3 months a year, which are literally sprouting right now. And it's the favorite food source of the kiriru, the native wood pigeon. So we have to work with foragers to harvest those berries. And when we capture them and dehydrate them, they concentrate down into something resplendent of ginger fruit cake and cola nut. So it's got this crazy kind of like ginger spice element, which really sort of drives below our recipe. And the last one, which is our most crazy one, is gorse flower, which is our absolute anti-establishment botanical. And it's our sort of floral note. It's not a pretty flower. It's not going to be a rose or a lavender or a potpourri kind of style gin, but it definitely lifts our aromatics. And that is another local event, which is absolutely my favorite of the year. And we had that about 3-4 weeks ago. And if you haven't seen on our social media the video of this year's gorse foraging, I couldn't recommend it enough. It sort of speaks in volumes. But we basically work with, again, more local volunteers or anybody who wants to join us, and the local 4-wheel drive club. And we load up 30 volunteers into 12 badass 4x4s, and we drive up into the beautiful pine plantations of Marlborough, these gorgeous views. We drag the same chef with his low and slow barbecue up, and we basically set them out on these crazy sort of 4-wheel drive sort of voyages to try to find different gorse flowers and bring them back to this sort of central base where we sort out the prickles from the flowers, we put them into bins ready to go, and then we do loads of food, and we also live distill on the mountain a little real-time run of gin using the wild gorse flowers, and everyone has a good day out.
Wow, sounds amazing.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's us.
Yeah,
that's our 6 botanicals. So yeah, that's what we do.
You're advertising that foraging well. People are already saying foraging sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Somebody says, yes, please, I want to join in. And I think, Anne, you get the prize. Wow, smells floral, really nice. And she did that before you talked about the gorse flower.
Yeah, gorse is amazing. My wife is English, and I lived in England for a long time. So gorse flower tea is an old school common thing, and gorse isn't a pest over there. So, but as a botanical, it's actually incredible if you pick it and you rub it between your fingers. It's got a really pungent coconut sort of element to it, and a slight kind of tropical banana note. So when we capture that, we then dehydrate that and put those into thermal vacuum bags so we can keep them as fresh as possible. And when you dehydrate them, they basically concentrate this sort of like slightly grassy note to it, but that tropical chamomile and tropical banana just is nuts, and it's stunning. And I mean, you have to like it because it's a ridiculous amount of effort to get a flower that's that big. Bushes with thorns that big, that's a national pest. So yeah, it's a labor of love. Yeah.
Ben, could you just take me back to the start of this passion for gin? So what was it that ignited the passion for you? Why gin? Why not any other spirit?
Couple of answers for that. One, I've spent my career largely in spirits, and so when I came back wanting to have a spirit brand of my own and have my own distillery, your dream immediately goes towards all of the really expensive classics, the whiskeys and cool tequilas and stuff like that. So to begin with, there are just some stuff we just can't do very easily in New Zealand. Whiskey is very sexy. There's no doubt about it, but it's just not a very smart business investment, I'll be honest, and I'll take my hat off to anybody in New Zealand who's given it a go and making a single malt, but that's a hard one to get some return on. But But really, gin is just so incredibly versatile, and so it's a great starting point. And here we are in New Zealand, the land of pure and plenty. We have access to some of the most incredible collection of native and otherwise botanicals, and so it's a melting pot of anybody interested in starting gin, because there are just so many different incredible directions to go in your flavors and in your ingredients. It's also, to be completely honest, the easiest one to make. I won't lie. It's if you're going to invest into any form of spirit distilling, gin is by far the easiest to make. The difficulty is making a good one, and that's where I spent 3.5 years in my little garage when I first moved back, just doing as many different single botanical runs as possible to learn as much as possible about different botanicals, how they express best in different ways in which you can represent those flavors, and etc. So it's easy but highly complicated, and it very much depends on how deep you want to get in the rabbit hole of flavors and expressions and distillations.
Did you have to become a chemist, or are you a chemist to actually carry out that experimentation, or is that all?
No, definitely not. No, I'm definitely not a chemist. Closest thing I did was physics, and I failed at that at school, I think. So I am a nerd, but I wasn't a nerd when I was at school. So it's something that came with the passion of getting into the industry, and I was very fortunate to be exposed at some really high levels with some major spirit companies in UK and Europe. I was a brand ambassador for cognac for a long time. I used to represent a lot of single malt scotches. So you kind of have these incredible experiences, and it's hard to not get absorbed in culture and provenance and passion when you're right there in the place where a certain spirit is or has been made for many years. So it went from there. And then after that, I started reading, and all of a sudden found a love. So I'm quite into chemistry now, and I'm big into terpenes and terpenoids, if anybody wants to dive into that conversation one day. But otherwise, no, definitely not a chemistry background.
Well, cheers from one wannabe gin nerd to a gin nerd.
Yeah,
cheers,
absolutely. And I see that Cordula's already cracked into it. You would have seen me.
Oh, sorry. I think I was meant to take you on a tasting, and I just dove straight into it. So please drink if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And so, would you like to start with a neat tasting? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
So what I would say is, have a sip to begin with. Don't wait for me. Have a sip at least if you haven't tried it neat yet. And to begin with, this is a 45% alcohol gin. That means it is much higher than the average. We all learnt on Gordon's probably, which is 37.5. Bombay Sapphire, Tanqueray in New Zealand is 40%. So you'll see that more and more craft spirits these days are generally 43 or above. And there's a simple reason for that, is that the higher the alcohol in your gin, the exponentially higher flavor and aroma profile. It's as simple as the flavors in the alcohol. If you add water to lower the level of the bottle, you're diluting those flavors. So that's why more and more craft spirits are higher, because we want you to taste them. An interesting nugget is that New Zealand has the smallest double legal serve in the Western world. So a New Zealand double measure, 30 ml, is a single in America. So when you go to a bar in New Zealand where they don't put enough ice in, and you get a single measure of gin, and then they top it up with too much tonic because there's more space in the glass, it's very, very tough to kind of taste your gins. So I was also very particular in making sure that it was a higher strength so that more of that flavor can step through. But basically, this is all done in the pot still behind me. And again, juniper forward, first of all, if you don't know what juniper should express like, it's basically a conifer as a plant. We call them juniper berries, but they're actually not a fruit at all. They're closer to a pine cone, and they're full of all this beautiful piney resin notes. So you really get these really resinous you can imagine walking into a pine forest and the pine needles and all that kind of element. Fresh berries also deliver quite a bit of slight fruitiness. And then we've got this clean citrus sort of vein that kind of runs right underneath it. It's not a big orange bomb like Tanqueray 10 or some of those other ones, but it definitely carries this clean citrus line underneath. And then there's just loads of, its name's expressive. It's quite rooty and savory and very, very spicy. It's got quite a lot of that kind of, kind of cooking spices. And the pepper of the kawa and that kind of slight cola nut ginger fruitcake element really does right underneath and carries on. You get spice and earthy notes later in the palate. They really last in the aftertaste. So it kind of begins with this big resinous, slightly fruity citric character, and then it kind of moves into this quite long finishing sort of spicy note. So yeah, we're very, very proud of this one.
And saying, I get a peppery citrus on the palate. Yum. Wonder if the pepper is the kawakawa.
It is, absolutely. So it's kawakawa, but it's the kawakawa berry, which is very different from the leaf. So so it's still part of the pepper plant, but unlike the leaf, which is a lot more down that classic kind of like black pepper note, when you have the berry, it just has these mulled spices, these intense mulled spices and kind of cola nut elements. So, but it's absolutely from that, and it's highly concentrated. You don't need very much. It's so strong. It really delivers a lot. So, yeah.
Wow. And the other thing I'm noticing, Ben, as well, is that the distinction of that grapefruit as against, whereas a lot of other gins will use a lemon citrus,
That's right.
or sometimes a lemon and orange blend, but that grapefruit is a little bit softer and a little bit subtler.
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I've always been a fan of citrus gins. I'm a massive stickler for always putting citrus in a gin and tonic, but basically citrus, Tanqueray 10's regarded as one of the greatest, gins ever made, and it's in the Hall of Fame for the Gin Guild in the UK. But it is a real big orange and lemon bomb, and I feel like it is lovely as it is still as a gin. You kind of almost lost your core gin part, your core kind of like juniper. So I definitely wanted a freshness, but I wanted it to not be over dominated. Lemon is great, but it's just a bit boring, I guess, and if you're only going to choose 6 botanicals and you want each of them to really express. I've always loved grapefruit from my years working behind the bar and flavors and things like that. What's quite interesting about this one is it's called the Golden Special. The variety is called Golden Special, and it's because pure grapefruits, which are Florida grapefruits, can't grow in New Zealand because we're too cool a climate. So New Zealand has this unique sort of species, which is a cross between a traditional Florida grapefruit and a pomelo. And so when you actually, and hopefully if you can come to the grapefruit appeal one day, when you peel them, the inside juice is actually orange in color, and you can drink it. It's very sweet. So even though it still has this slight tartness to it, it's got this rich, almost orange pomelo element to it. And I really feel like as a flavor, it almost has, it's not a pure grapefruit citrus. It kind of has this bizarre, almost orange grapefruit, which I think you hit on the head. So it just became more and more exciting the more we played with it, to be honest.
Yeah, and the other thing that really strikes me by it, because clearly my palate really can hone in on grapefruit. I don't know why. I mean, I love grapefruit, but the other thing that strikes me is there is almost, I want to say, a definitive finish to that as well. So I can sense the smoothness of the grapefruit, but then there's this definitive finish that almost feels a little bit like slightly that, the pith that you get on a grapefruit. There's a little bit of a tiny tinge of that in there for me. So,
yeah, it's fascinating, because one area that I just never expected to understand or learn, or I didn't even know existed when I started out, was texture. And you don't think of gin as to being textural. And you definitely, I don't know how many people are into drinking it neat, but we do a lot of contract distilling as well. We basically consult for R&D development. So we get really big into recipe development and playing around for people. And there's always just so much to learn. But one thing that is one of our biggest kind of like daily lessons is about this thing called louche. Have any of you guys heard of louche before? Louche?
Louche.
So louche is a very cool word, and louche is a word that is used in the spirits industry, but is massively popularized in gin. And it is the natural clouding effect that happens from spirits that have a high quantity of oil that passes through. Now, oil is responsible for so much of any flavor, any distillate, any botanical, but there are certain oils that don't like water. They're called hydrophobic. And as such, when those oils concentrate and express through distillation, when you hydrate them, to drop your bottle strength to 45 or 40, your gin can literally turn color, can go milky white. And the most extreme version of this is if anyone's ever had absinthe or pastis before, it's clear in a bottle, but as soon as you pour your water in it to drink it, the whole thing goes milky white. So that's an extreme version of the same thing. And so there's this argument in sort of old school, new school gin circles about, whether that's an imperfection in distilling or not, but that is a high concentration of flavor. So more and more sort of craft spirits are proudly embracing the louche, that saying that it might be clear in bottle, but when you mix the tonic, you might see it has a slight blue shift. And that's a oil hydrophobic reaction that's creating this sort of like slight opaqueness. And it's a great sign of a highly concentrated gin. The other thing it does is that it also has a mouthfeel on it, which creates a slight silkiness to the palate, and it also takes away from raw ethanol edges. So when you are drinking a slightly loose gin, and you probably might see if you haven't already, when you add tonic to ours has a slight blue shift. That shows that there's some oils in here. Now, if you were to put our bottle in the freezer, it would go almost completely white. It's quite nuts because cold, or really, really cold temperatures also solidifies oils. But as soon as it warms up again, it would clarify. It's quite crazy. And there is a lot of these gins in the market. Even the Hero 4 Pillars has on their website, you might find our gin goes a bit cloudy when put in the fridge. Don't be afraid, it's not broken. It's just a concentration of flavors. So it's another interesting little geek thing for you, but it does give ours a definite slight creamy sort of silky texture to it. And it makes it very, very easy to drink at 45% because it's actually softened some of those raw ethanol edges. So cheers.
Amazing. Okay, what is everybody saying? Sorry, I was so fascinated by what.
I'm just overloaded.
I'm so sorry. I was so fascinated by what you were saying. I was literally like forgot to do my job. So let's see. What is everyone saying? Okay, Cordula's having a problem. She suspects that this one's going to evaporate as well. That is a regular problem that we have, isn't it, on our tastings? Yeah, it goes down a little bit too easy, doesn't it, this one, Cordula? Somebody else is saying it's very drinkable. Yes. Delicious, we're seeing.
Awesome. Great feedback.
And here we are, very yummy. Ice definitely brings out the flavors. Can you speak
It's
to
an
that?
interesting comment, actually. And
yeah,
there's you know, I say I'm not a chemical guy, but basically ice brings out flavors because it melts and it adds water. Now, when it comes to the way certain chemical flavors express, the vast majority of them are concentrated and sort of travel through alcohol or ethanol. But there are a certain small group of flavors that only express in water. And they are predominantly the earthier, sort of barky, rooty flavors. And so by adding water or diluting your gin, you can find that certain botanicals really pop. And a really classic one, and the amount of times we've had this where we've tasted another gin made by someone else, and you add water, it's beautiful, neat, and it's all good, but as soon as you add water to it, coriander seed explodes because it's one of those key botanicals that is so bound into a lot of its water-borne flavor component that, yeah, you can drink some gins over ice and they're brilliant, but they transition. The more the ice melts, you might see the flavor changes a bit. So it's quite fascinating. Yeah.
And what about temperature effect? Does that have an effect on the taste in particular?
So temperature doesn't affect the taste per se, but it affects the reaction. So the warmer the gin or the spirit is, the higher it evaporates. You know, it's more volatile. So obviously if it's heated up, you're going to get a much bigger nose on it, and it's going to probably blow your face off when you try to drink it if you're trying to drink it neat. So chilling it, you know, does actually slow down and soften any spirit, vodka or gin or otherwise. So, you know, putting them in the fridge if you're a big martini lover is definitely an easier way to sort of, you know, consume them. But what does happen is your palate actually receives flavors at different temperatures in different ways. So, you know, classic example is how yummy is an iced coffee? How yummy is a hot coffee? How horrible is a lukewarm coffee? You know, so it's the same liquid, but the way that our palate receives flavor is very, very subjective to temperature. So that's another influence. Yeah.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoever said this, I'm with you. Yes, I am learning so much. I am totally with you.
I'm a teacher. I apologize. I actually am a teacher. I teach spirits as well. So yeah.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job, Ben, I can tell you. Everyone's really loving this. So if you were to go with a mixer, I mean, it's kind of seems like sacrilege to do it, but if you were to go with a mixer and add to this delicious drop, what would you go with, Ben?
So we love East Imperial. We're a big supporter of any good tonics, but especially if those good tonics are made in New Zealand. I think that's awesome. So we really love East Imperial, and they obviously have a wide range. So the one that we sort of enjoy the most is East Imperial Yuzu tonic, which is a citrus forward tonic. Yuzu is a crazy little Japanese citrus fruit. It's sort of meant to have 5 times as much citrus as a standard lemon, but in half the size. It's really aromatic, concentrated citrus. So It's still a traditional quinine, so traditional sort of Indian tonic, but has a bit more of a citrus profile. And as I sort of said it earlier, I clearly quite like citrus forward flavors. So for me, I just think that complements very well with everything. It doesn't take away from the core flavors of roots, but does help to turn up a little bit of that grapefruit. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to go past Fever Tree East Imperial Indian tonic. I think it's sort of widely regarded as probably the best replacement for traditional Schweppes Indian tonic because it has less sugar in it. It's a bit more drier, but it has that big quinine body to it that we all identify with the traditional Indian tonic water. So I enjoy that too. But you mentioned Mediterranean. That's a cracking tonic. I think if there was one that probably just seems to fit so well with so many, it's almost like a safe bet. I think it's a fantastic across the board, really, really safe, but very, very flavoursome tonic as well. So yeah, good call.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, Mediterranean? Because like obviously we match all of the gins that we have in the box with tonics, and so we'll look to we taste everything, see which ones work best, and Mediterranean is one of those ones that either works or it really doesn't.
I think it's a safe bet. I think it really is a safe bet, definitely. With the exception of just trying to have a traditional Indian tonic water, but it is a safe bet. And what is interesting though is that people get really excited, and I don't want to take away any fun, but obviously, you go into these incredible gin bars, and I think before it became an MIQ facility in Auckland, the Churchill on the 20th floor of the Sheraton Hotel on Queen Street, with its crazy views and massive gin menu, and they would have a 20-strong gin and tonic list. This gin with this tonic and this garnish, and this gin with this tonic and this garnish, and it's great to sort of pair those things together. The difficulty that I have as a producer is if somebody's first experience of tasting roots is with a tonic that they've never had before, or with a tonic that they've had with someone else's gin, if they like it or don't like it, you don't know if it's because of the gin or if it's because of the tonic, but people do judge the gin first. So it's sort of my advice is always, if you're trying a spirit for the first time, try it also with a tonic that because that's the template, that's the canvas. That way you can decide if this gin is for you or not. You kind of almost need that neutral, So whether that's Schweppes or whether that's Fever Tree, if it's something then you've got a bit more of a comparative to sort of work off.
And somebody was asking, where's that comment? Oh, here we are. What is your go-to way to enjoy roots? A la naturel.
I have to say, lockdown's an amazing thing, right? I've got two very young kids at home, and I've got a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. So talk about sucker for punishment, right? But they're amazing, and obviously lockdown, it does a lot of things. But not blaming my kids for it, but my wife and I definitely embraced cocktails a lot more during lockdown, and I think people just naturally expect us to go home and start smashing out all these cocktails, but we really did during the first lockdown, and so we kind of rediscovered a love for martinis, and when it comes to gin, that's kind of the original cocktail. So but at the same time, there's this really old school one called a gimlet, which is predominantly more about Navy strength gins, and it's got a beautiful piece of history. So we've been really enjoying gimlets as well, but which is a sort of a different style of martini. But otherwise, big Negroni fan, massive Negroni geek. We had some fun by batching up some Otago cherries and macerating them in Negroni for 9 months, which we had a small release of recently. So clearly like Negronis as well. But otherwise, gin and tonic, hot day, you're a bit parched, you got some friends around, it's just hard to beat.
It really is on a hot day.
Yeah.
Ben, you mentioned Navy strength. Elemental do Navy strength gin as well, don't you? I've heard rumors there's a story behind the creation of that gin.
Yeah, if you haven't learned by now, there's always a story. So
any truth to those rumors?
Yeah, so because I'm a spirits geek and an old teacher and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of our story is expressed on the label. So we've got our botanicals, hand illustrated on the bottle of our traditional roots, and we've been open for 2 years, but we still only had one gin because we have so much effort goes into that one bloody SKU. So always wanted to produce a Navy. Now, Navy is got a lovely piece of history built behind the Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy, who for over 200 years used to pay their sailors in rum rations. I think most people know that. Whereas a lot of the officers, the Admiralty, they would drink gin because gin was a little bit more of an aristocratic sort of spirit. The person aboard each vessel whose job it was to purchase the supplies for each voyage was called a pusser, and they would buy barrels of rum and gin for the voyage for their crew. And to make sure that the merchants in whichever port of call wasn't basically stiffing them over by diluting the spirit down, they would do what was called the proof test, where they literally added gunpowder to a little sample of the rum or gin and ignited it. And if the alcohol was high enough and therefore it hadn't been diluted, it would still combust with the gunpowder. And that is the proof test that literally continues the word proof today on alcohol definitions in North American spirits. So what happened many, many years later is that there was finally an invention that allowed us to measure alcohol by volume called a hydrometer. And when that was measured, they took the same level of proof testing and they put them through the hydrometer and found out there was a specific point which all navy rums and gins were, which is around about 54 to 57% alcohol. So we launched ours very proudly at the original proof strength, which is 54.5. We then also launched it by blowing it up with gunpowder. So, on World Gin Day last year on June 13th, we had, I teamed up with the local Black Powder Club and got these two old guys with their muskets, got them some official Regency outfits from an old Treaty of Waitangi filming, which was all authentic. And we had two cannons, which we blew up, which we set off. We had all these people out in front of the distillery with braziers. We did Navy gin punches, served hot and spicy. We had stew and big white bread that people were dipping in and eating whilst watching this procession. And we had, purely by chance, I managed to meet a lady locally who is retired, but she's an ex-Royal Navy Lieutenant Commander of an aircraft carrier, and she retired in Blenheim. So she ended up teaching all of us how to march. And she we had a gin pennant that we had to raise, and then the cannons had to go off, and then the muskets fired. And then we had this sort of chief armorer from Base Woodburn, our big Air Force base here, who got us a whole bunch of black powder and a howitzer shell. And the whole grand procession was to literally pour the gin into this howitzer shell full of gunpowder, light a wick, and everybody was just kind of waiting to see what happened. And the thing, blew up, and everyone was and we just drank it. So that was our kind of like semi-professional authentication of our Navy strength gunpowder proof gin.
Please don't blow up any more gin.
More little illustrations. It's called the nor'wester because it's a big, strong wind that's prevailing. So we've got like a stormy nor'wester isobar, cannons, sails, the story of our botanicals. There's some gunpowder there, all sorts of stuff. And we added 2 new botanicals to that recipe. We've got hemp from Hawke's Bay, because the Royal Navy were the biggest growers of hemp in history because it was their super fiber to use for sails and ropes and sacks and clothing. And then we also added a little bit of Akara organic kelp. So there's a touch of sort of iodine salinity that kind of gives you a bit of an aromatic reminiscence of stormy South Seas.
Oh, I do love a bit of kelp in the gin, I must say.
Yeah, kelp it sounds a bit scary, but I assure you it's primarily on the nose. It kind of has a little bit more of a stormy aromatic rather than a flavor profile. But yeah, it's good.
Oh, I don't mind it right in the gin, but everyone knows that after the Shearwater tasting the other week.
Yeah, Shearwater's amazing. She's awesome. So she's
I know, hasn't she done a great job? Yeah.
Yeah, she really has. She's lovely as well.
Yeah, she is. Justine's amazing. So Cordula is taking you back to Martini because Cordula is our resident Martini pro. She wants to know what your favorite recipe is with martinis.
Recipes one of the martinis are one of those things where it's less about the recipe and more about the technique. And anyone who sort of spent time as a bartender, it's kind of like par and parcel of like making the perfect old fashioned, making the perfect Manhattan, making the perfect martini. So it's about as cold as possible with as minimal dilution as possible. And then your particular ratio of dry vermouth to sweet. Some people rinse the glass and throw it away. Some people coat the ice and stir the ice 15 times, in a counterclockwise direction whilst facing Mecca. Everyone has their own little ritual. So for me, I quite like a wet martini compared to a dry martini is a little bit more dry vermouth than not. So I prefer mine a little bit on the wet side. I like to have a little bit of dry vermouth coming through, and then a big snap of lemon. So big, beautiful lemon oils over the top. Serve it in a glass that you've had cold from the freezer, and good company, which is the most important thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And bitters. I actually quite like bitters. I make bitters, so I'm a bit biased, but I do like putting a bit of grapefruit and hop bitters in there as well, which we also
I was going to ask you about your bitters because I
Mm.
think, like this is and I think that's going to be another call all on its own is when we launch into your bitters. But, like this is an area that a lot of people, myself included, have very little idea of how we should even be using them.
Yeah, it's pretty niche. Yeah, it really
And
is.
you've got such a range.
Well, I've got 3, and but they're kind of like designed to be diverse from each other. So
Yeah,
sort of
that's
3
what
different
I'm
flavors.
meaning. Like,
Yeah.
how would I even pick which one to go in my
No,
gin?
it's a bloody good question, and it's definitely my hardest thing is trying to sort of get the communication. So, bitters are basically regarded as the seasoning of the liquid world. So, in the way that certain flavors and fats open up with a roast when you add salt and pepper to it, bitters are all about enhancing aromatics. They take a flavor and they turn that up from 10 to 15. So it's about literally making you taste more. So aromatics, the primary driver for aromatics is bitter. So bitterness is the main driver for us to aromatically detect flavor. And if you block your nose whilst having medicine, it obviously makes it easier to go down because your sense of smell is so important. In fact, cinnamon and orange, you absolutely can't taste as a human if you have a blocked nose. It's quite a fun little trick to do with a shot of Contro with your mates. But basically, it's so for us, if you add bitters or a bitter element to a liquid, you can absolutely detect so much more of the flavors that are in there. So we design bitters to focus on specific profiles, and then you use that profile bitters for that profile mixture. So we have a grapefruit and hops designed for anything with a citrus bone to it. It could be a gin and tonic, vodka lime and soda, margarita, a daiquiri. And then we've got a coffee and pimento bitters, which is designed to complement anything with an oak maturation to it. So it's not about espresso martinis, it's about Manhattans, old fashioned Sazeracs, anyone who's big into their drinking and mixing with premium oak matured spirits. And then the middle one is for anything with a fruity profile, and it's blackberry and balsamic. And it's awesome. And again, all New Zealand sourced and all 55% concentrated essences, little 100ml bottles with a dash of plug on the top, like a Tabasco top. And you just put about 4 dashes into your drink and mix it through, and it'll start singing.
Mm.
So with my gin and tonic, I'd be going grapefruit and hops.
Generally, yeah, because obviously, especially with roots, it obviously complements, but the citrus, the crispness, the freshness, we call it the citrus refresher. So anytime you're having a drink that's refreshing and citrusy, grapefruit and hops, yeah.
Mm.
So
bartenders go nuts for them. So yeah, if anyone's ever gone into a cocktail bar and seen all these little mini tincture bottles on the back bar, that's where bartenders get nuts, collecting all these crazy little.
Yeah, they're loving the sound of them. Oh, yum, coffee and pimento.
The coffee and pimento is banging, is absolutely banging. It's a single origin yoga chef coffee from Ethiopia. We bring in through Ozone Coffee in Taranaki. They roast it to a really light expression for us. We get that within 2 weeks of them roasting it, and we macerate that for about 3.5 weeks in whole bean, and then we blend that in a way. So yeah, it's awesome.
And Sarah, we have the bitters available on the website for sale at suggestion.co.nz.
Nice. We actually don't have the bitters just yet. So
we can sort that out.
Yeah. Somebody is asking, can we get some of the bitters into the suggestion site? Yes, we will be getting the bitters into the suggestion site. But in the meantime, you will have to get them direct off Ben at the moment. Because we won't be able to get, well, with the way the couriers are, we won't be getting any time soon.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
We'll still send you an order though, Ben.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, without doubt. And we'll start playing around with them as a membership and as a group, and we'll see what comes of it. And then we'll have Ben back on, and we'll tell him all the great things we've created with the bitters. Yes, please, bitters, everyone's saying. Yes, Goodness me. Goodness me. You've just opened up a can of worms there, Ben.
I know, sorry about that.
Yeah, no. It's all
you went
good.
to the series. Anyway.
Now, Ben, can you tell me about the beautiful piece of apparatus that's behind you at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks impressive.
So hopefully you can still hear me okay. But this is, we made this made to order. So this is a bespoke 200 litre copper pot hybrid still. which involves a 200-litre, kind of like a tea kettle, where we put our neutral spirit and then we add certain number of our botanicals in there, and then we do a process called maceration. So it's a decision that distillers either choose to use or not. It makes it more expensive to make because it takes you a full day of literally making like a loose leaf tea from your botanicals and liquid. This is before you've even turned any heat on. So we do that pre-maceration process, which extracts way more flavor from the botanicals without stressing it with heat. And then when we come to distill it a day later, we've lost a day in labor, but it allows us much more concentrated flavor. So we do that in our boiler. This is heated by an oil jacket. So this stainless steel sheath around the outside is full of recycled oil, vegetable oil. We heat that oil up. We turn this thing on the back here, which is a big motor, and it slowly stirs it and keeps stirring it for as long as we want. Then when it gets up to boiling point, basically it will boil like a pot of water on the stove. But the fundamental difference is that alcohol boils lower than water. So if alcohol is at 100 degrees Celsius, alcohol or ethanol, which is the good drinking alcohol, boils at about 80 degrees Celsius. Okay. So when it gets to 80, it'll literally roll and boil, but instead of water vapor coming off, it'll be alcohol vapor, and trapped in it will be all those concentrated flavors. It'll then go on a journey up through this cool little helmet that just cleans it up a little bit. Then it goes along this way into our first valve, and we send it up, and we bypass this crazy looking thing completely. We bypass this crazy looking thing completely, and we come down into this, which is our condenser. And that's flush full of cold water. That alcohol vapor then recools back into a liquid, and we collect it out of this nuts little bit, which is called a parrot's beak. And we'll literally get gin coming out of that for a period of about 5 to 6 hours. What we then do is we separate that run into 3 parts called the heads, the hearts, and the tails. The first bit, the middle bit, and the last bit. And every distiller in the world does this, no matter what spirit they're making. It's a standard process. For gin, however, we're not separating it by different good flavors. Other distillers basically are separating stuff that could be a little bit poisonous or a bit bad. But for gin, because we distill over neutral spirit, everything's clean and everything's healthy. So all we're doing is focusing flavors. So what we do is we collect the heads and the tails, and we put those separately together, and we only keep the middle bit called the hearts. So every distiller who makes gin collects a heart, but they decide where their heart is. So some distillers might have 90% of their total run might be the heart cut. So they get a great return on investment, big volume. For us, however, our best flavor profile is 54% of our total run. So we've lost a whole day in macerating. Then we've distilled for 6 hours, but we're only keeping 54% of it. And that's because during a pot run, which is what we do, your flavor's constantly changing, because each one of your flavoring chemicals, terpenoids, each one of these has a different extraction boiling point. So over 6 hours, you're constantly going through different flavor spectrums, and it's really cool because you're constantly tasting it and you're seeing how it's transitioning and taking on a different botanical, different flavor, a different fruit, different flower. And so what your job is to catch the best part of that basically and then sell it. But if you obviously catch a small part, which is the best like ours, how do you financially justify throwing away so much? So we also put this thing in, which is called a reflux column, and we can take our heads and tails on a different day, and we can redistill that gin. It's still a food grade gin, it just doesn't have the best flavor. We can redistill that, run it through this thing, and we can strip it pretty much back to a really neutral vodka, and then we can reintroduce that into future runs as a base spirit, and it allows us to financially justify focusing on the absolute best part of our run.
And when you're determining your heart, that 54%, is that tasting? Is that your palate that's determining that, or is there something a little bit more scientific that decides this is the cutoff point?
Oh, I'd love to say there's something scientific about it, but no, there's a lot of romantic license. So basically, you can actually get into some pretty amazing science on this stuff, but you need to have some pretty expensive lab kit. But basically, I guess that's the real romance of being a distiller, is that you decide. You decide where it expresses. Now, there's a whole other way of distilling, which is vapor baskets. So vapor baskets are exactly what Bombay Sapphire is 100%. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages with any decision you make as a distiller. But if you put all of your botanicals into a vapor basket, what that is basically like a big tea bag or a metal tea bag, that sits above your liquid, and then the alcohol vapor, which is neutral, passes through it and pulls the flavor out. Now that's a really simple way of distilling, which is quick, cost effective, no maceration needed. But what you don't get is the same transition of flavors chemically expressing like you do if you boil them. So there are pros and cons on both. And if you do a vapor basket run, it's definitely so much easier. But when you're in a boiler run, you kind of have to make a decision somewhere. And it's the simplest way you start is you keep tasting it until it tastes amazing, and then you decide to keep it. And then you keep tasting it while it's amazing until it gets not amazing, and then you stop.
Yeah.
So that's the most simple way, but it's not that simple because everything has to be a sum of its parts. So you need a little bit of not amazing to give you that extra balance to your amazing. And the simplest way to sort of express is you get groups of flavors through that whole run. And in the heads, you get a high concentration of citrus, but not a lot else. It's quite clean, it's quite neutral, but you can get a lot of citrus chemical flavors coming out. Whereas in the tails, you get those water activated flavors I was talking about. So you start getting all of these barks and roots, and if it runs too long, it starts getting a bit like a wet dog and a bit moldy cardboard. That's because your temperature is now getting closer to the boiling point of water, and you're starting to get water vapor boiling through. And so you're activating water flavors. Now, a little bit of those tails water flavors is so important to add a bit of earthy, barky note to your super floral, super sweet, super fruity note in the middle. Otherwise, you just get something that's just way too pretty, So you do have to always think that while it's tasting amazing now, it actually needs a little bit more citrus in it, and it actually needs a little bit of that earthy note to really pull the complexities together.
So I have to apologize because I did ask if you were a chemist earlier, and what I've learned is you're an artist.
An artist. I've never thought of myself as an artist. I'm just an excited.
That sounds like gin art to me. Now that just sounds like gin art.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's always, we've constantly been schooled. We have 6 botanicals, but my God, we're constantly learning, especially with the variabilities of, even macerating at different times of the year, different seasonal botanical influences. We're foraging, which is real sexy, but it's a bloody nightmare, and you're never getting the same thing each time. So, you can lose yourself in the detail. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a couple of questions coming through. First of all, we'll go to Kerry. Kerry's asking, do you keep some of the extreme ends of the heads and tails?
Yes, we do, and it's another story, unfortunately, but we do this.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Hand sanitizer.
This is gin-scented hand sanitizer called Heads and Tails. So if we have, 45% byproduct, which is on average 78% gin, and it might not be the most stunning gin, but it's definitely botanically scented. Then when COVID came in, it was a no-brainer to turn it to sanitizer. So ironically, we were one of only 2 distilleries in New Zealand who had already started doing this before lockdown was announced, and the other one was Good George. Yeah. And when Jacinda Ardern announced, you've all got 48 hours before you go into lockdown, and anyone who wanted to work as an essential worker had to have, sanitizer amongst, everything else. So sanitizer sold out in the country in less than a day. And then in the next 48 hours, all packaging from 70 mils to 7 litres sold out. And nobody could get shipments in. So there's nothing to put stuff in. So I already had 1 litre jerry cans, and I had a few of these. And I also had a lot of ethanol. And then the World Health Organization put out a recipe saying, if you want to make sanitizer, this is our recommended formulation. You add hydrogen peroxide and you add glycerol. So I managed to get very, last orders of that, and we were already making it, and then lockdown was announced. So at that point, we got bombarded. So I had one of the greatest monopolies probably in New Zealand for 2 weeks. Not that I could make it. We had New Zealand's Fire and Emergency Services trying to order it off us. I had a procurement manager from New Zealand's Correctional Department ask for 8,000 litres a week. And I'm in my bubble by myself in my shipping containers, filling 1 litre jerry cans by hand, trying to ferry these emails from these massive, companies like desperate for sanitizers. So it was a pretty crazy period, but so anyways, we don't sell a lot of it now because obviously the market's back exhausted, but we do keep a little bit in the distillery, which is quite fun. And we possibly might be shipping a bit to Europe. So we'll see where that goes.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Courtney is also wanting to know, what do you use for your base spirit?
Good question. This is another big talking point. So
Yes.
our base spirit is whey, and proudly whey. I'm actually quite a pro whey person, and it definitely is a big discussion point for a lot of distillers and anyone who's sort of passionate about their gin. So whey is as it sounds, it is the byproduct of our A2 milk, where Anchor, now owned by Fonterra, takes large volumes of this beautiful milk, separates it into curds and whey. The curds go to cheese, yogurt, and butter, and the whey is a natural byproduct. The whey is high in protein and it's alcoholic. So they have Fonterra, this massive refinery in the North Island that has for many, many years been taking the whey byproduct, and they have been distilling it into a neutral spirit and selling it for commercial alcohol. And then all of a sudden, New Zealand decided to start a distilling industry, and we have access to this completely sustainable New Zealand byproduct of neutral spirit. So we use that as our base alcohol, and it's amazing. Traditionally, it's neutral grain spirit, but that's because England's history of making gin is their most volumetric byproduct, which is grain based.
Mm.
If you go to South America, you'll see that South Africa, rather, a lot of it is sugarcane. So a lot of gins made in South Africa are actually neutral grain spirit from sugarcane. If you go to parts of Europe, it's beet sugar. So there's kind of this big argument about, but pure English gins are made from neutral grain spirit. The key is that the word neutral, and that's where it really makes a difference. So if you as a distiller are buying a chemically neutral spirit, which literally has a definition, that means that you shouldn't be able to have any perceptible flavor or aroma. And therefore, you as a consumer drinking a gin made from neutral spirit means that you're only tasting what the distiller has done to it. You're only tasting their botanicals or their decisions based on distilling. And and there's no shortage of distillers trying to make their own neutral spirit, and it's by far the best story, but it's very expensive, and you'll find that often the distillers that are making their own neutral spirit are charging a lot more for the story of something that technically you can't taste. So it gets very tough to kind of like have that whole neutral spirit discussion, but mine is whey, proudly.
And you said that it was A2 whey. As against...
a lot of it's A2, so we try to only get the A2 whey, because we're starting to be able to be a little bit more picky about it. We're trying to get also only the organic stuff, but there's not enough. So so much of the milk is A2, and they're separated off for ethanol, whereas all of the more commercial stuff that's not particularly A2 graded milk goes into a bit more industrial, which is not food grade, and then that might go to paint industries or anywhere else that needs some commercial alcohol that isn't imbibable. So
wow, amazing. Well, this has been absolutely fabulous. Has anybody got any last questions for Ben? Because I'm watching the clock and we're at 57 minutes, so we were running a little bit late, so I've let it go a little bit longer. So you've got 2 minutes and 15 seconds to get another question in if you need to. I can see by all the comments, Ben, people are just blown away. They've been so fascinated by everything that you've shared this evening. And, certainly everybody has been really enjoying the gin as well, which of course is what we're here for. Any last comments, anyone, before we wrap up for this evening? Oh, yeah. Kerry's saying, I love your passion. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kerry.
So true, right, Kerry? Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Oh, here's a question for you. Are there any new releases in the pipeline? They always make a scoop, this group, I tell you.
Yeah, so we had our 100th run, and we brought out the Roots number 100 just as a little runoff, 200 bottles. And it was 100% more botanicals. It was 100 days, 100 hours macerated instead of 24, and we bottled it at 100 proof, which is 50% alcohol. And it's like our normal gin on acid. Like, it was the most spectacular thing we've ever made. So we got a bit ridiculously excited about that. People went a bit nuts for it. So we'd like to release that as a premium in the future again. But we love playing around with limited releases. So, worth following just to see what's unique. We do usually, just 1 or 2 batches of something, 200 to 400 bottles, and it's done, And what we've got coming up is what we're calling the Chesterfield. And it's sort of meant to be a bit more of a early winter release. And we're basically going, I bought a barrel, which was ridiculous, which I got very excited about because certain barrels are very hard to get in New Zealand. And I got this particular barrel. And then we put neutral spirit in it, 7 kilograms of our wild juniper, which we muddled and, made it soft. And we left it there for just over a month to macerate in a barrel. New char, massive oak influence to create this base oak matured juniper spirit that we then going to distill on the top of. So that's going to be our neutral spirit. Then we're going to smoke some orange, and then we're going to toast some coriander seed, and then we're going to build the Roots recipe on top of that. So it's going to be this kind of like, sitting in a Chesterfield chair in front of a fireplace, sipping a neat gin with all these crazy oak and juniper and smoke flavors. So that's a pretty rogue one, which we're going to release just towards the end of summer, basically. So look out for that.
Wow. Okay.
And just remember, our subscribers are the perfect test market.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, fair call. No, fair call. Absolutely.
We've got much to talk about, right?
Yeah, Russell's frantically writing notes here. I can see him. Cordial is asking, have you ever thought about experimenting with gunpowder?
Well, we've definitely experimented with gunpowder already, but not from a drinking perspective. So we've definitely blown up a lot with gunpowder. It's a whole Navy launch, and there's videos of the whole gunpowder stuff we've done on our social media. But otherwise, as a flavour, it's interesting. I know there's a lovely guy Ben in Wellington who does gunpowder rum, and he's done actually a little bit of gunpowder gin as a flavouring as well. Ben Simpson is an awesome guy, but it's I'm not quite convinced that it's going to do much advantage to a gin. But hey, maybe I just need to play more. I mean, I'm an easy one to convince to play with something like gunpowder. So yeah, I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, clearly. We'll go and watch the video after this. Yeah, absolutely.
Just stop using it to blow up your gin, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was fun though. I do have another crazy idea, but that's for another day. Yeah. Sweet.
All right, so we've got a few thank yous coming through. Thank you. Your energy,
Appreciate
your
it.
knowledge, and your passion has been amazing. Cordial is saying thank you so much, Ben. It's been educational and entertaining, not to mention delicious. So I think that sums it up very nicely, Cordial, doesn't it?
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure for you guys, and it's so nice. And I'm in quite a little corner of the South Island, so it's always a real pleasure to be able to meet anybody, or just be able to do this sort of one-on-one stuff with you all. So huge thanks to suggestion.co.nz for obviously the opportunity and for ultimately linking me to you. So thank you.
Yeah. So this has been an absolute pleasure. For myself, I always love these evenings, but gosh, you've really educated us this evening, and it's been absolutely amazing, Ben. And I'm just noticing here's a comment from somebody we can visit. Now I know that we can visit because Fraser has already been to visit. And for those of you who know Blenheim very well, Ben, do you want to just talk us through where you're situated in Blenheim and how people can find you?
Yeah, so we're probably just under 10 minutes out of Blenheim, rural setting. We're located in what's called the Golden Mile, which is the highest concentration of wineries in New Zealand. So we're right on the wine trail, and we're at a place called the Vines Village. We're kind of hidden out the back of it, which is a gastronomic retail hub with some where you can hire bikes and cycle to all the cellar doors and stuff. So we're at the Vines Village, but our address is obviously on the website and everything, so you can find us pretty easily that way. But tours are by appointment because we're just so small. There's just myself and Alex, my amazing and underrated sort of distillery manager. And so the two of us are here doing everything. And so we love doing tours, but we do need to do it, with a booking, so we can obviously organise it around everything else we're doing. So you get a much more intimate experience that way as well. So yeah, definitely drop us a line if you ever come through Marlborough.
Yeah. So people are saying this has to be on our gin tour, and I totally agree. The gin tour is certainly underway. The planning is underway, but of course we have this funny little thing called COVID going on, and it's kind of putting a bit of a kibosh on the tour at the moment. But we do have one of our team working on it and trying to pull it all together. And yes, Ben, we'll definitely be calling on you and saying, hey, can we bring our group of crazy gin lovers all the way through your refinery. Yeah.
Awesome.
So.
Well, we're 20 minutes away from the ferry. So if anyone's taking the South Island ferry, it's 20 minutes away from Picton. So
Yeah. Somebody's saying, is it Renwick?
Very close.
Yeah, it is.
You can almost walk to Renwick. So it's
Yeah.
Renwick's like not even 5 minutes away.
I've stayed in what is the hotel across the road?
The Vendors Retreat. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, I've stayed there. Lovely. That'll be a great spot. We can just stay there, everyone.
And then just walk over. And then crawl back. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that wraps us up for this evening. For everybody, just a little note on our next live tasting, which will be our new box coming out to you. So a little bit of update on the boxes. We are waiting on one component on our box. I'm hoping that it shows up first thing tomorrow morning, so then we can start to ship. And you may see some familiar faces delivering some boxes if you live in Auckland this month. And including my colleague sitting right next to me. So we will be, we don't have a tasting next week because we're wanting to make sure everybody gets their box, but the following week you will have a tasting on the 25th, which is actually Labor Day, so perfectly timed for us to have a tasting, because you'll all be ready to have a gin anyway come the evening of Labor Day. And so that will be, I can't tell you who it is yet because you don't know, because you haven't got your box. So we will keep you in suspense for another week until we get to that particular date. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking Ben and thanking him for this amazing gin, which, this has been, I think, Russell, has it been 8 months in the making? We wanted to get gin and roots into our first box.
Correct. Yeah.
So it is so great to have finally had Ben join us and have Roots in the box, and welcome Roots to the Suggestion family as well.
Awesome.
So,
great to be here.
So thank you so much, Ben, and ka kite, everybody. We
Cheers,
shall
Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, see you next week or the week after, 25th.
Thanks, team. Take care.